Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at my 7th round game here in Norway Chess, where I was playing with the white pieces against Shaquille O'Neal. Or wait, whoops, did I just say that? So actually, I was playing against Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, who of course we call Shaq in honor of the famous basketball legend. So round number 7, I'm playing with the white pieces, and let's jump right into the action. So here we go. So I'm playing with the white pieces, and I open with this move d4. Shaq plays d5, and now it's worth noting that I knew that d4 would come as a bit of a surprise to my opponent because I have not actually played the move 1d4 since all the way back in March of 2022. In both the Candidates Tournament, which I played in July of last year, as well as the American Cup, I have not played 1d4. I played either c4 or e4, but I have not played d4 for over a year. As such, I thought it would be a good choice today. So I play d4. Shaq plays d5. I go c4 here. And now Shaq decides to take the pawn on c4. And we've reached the classic Queen's Gambit accepted. Here I play e4. And now he plays the move e5. Now in olden days, all the way back in 2012, I actually played knight f6 in the final round of the Chess Olympiad in Istanbul, Turkey, in our match between the US and Poland against Radek Wojtaszek. Now, unfortunately, I would lose that game. But at the time, knight to f6 was considered the best move. But times do change. Theory changes. Computer programs get better, and nowadays we know that this move e5 is considered the best move. So after e5, I play knight to f3, and now Shakhriyar plays bishop b4. Now, it's worth noting at the same time, while my game was going on, I did look up at the big screen, which showed all the other games, and I noticed the exact same position had occurred in the game between Wesley So and Norbek Abdustora. Now, in that game, Norbek would actually play pawn takes pawn, and after bishop c4, knight f6, and castles, Norbek would play the very dubious move queen to f6, and he would go on to be soundly crushed by Wesley So, which would vault Wesley up into 3rd place. Now, in my game, there's also an interesting anecdote here, which is that while I was waiting for Shaq to move, Shaq for a second went to reach for his knight on g8 as though he was going to play knight f6. Now, knight f6 is maybe still a move, but it's definitely not the best move because after bishop takes c4, if black plays bishop b4 check here, now white can play knight bd2, and after e takes d4 and castles, we end up in a completely different variation altogether. So Shaq went to reach for the knight, but then he seemed to realize that it was a mistake, and he correctly touched the bishop and played bishop to b4, checking the king on e1. After bishop to b4, I played the move knight c3, and now he plays knight to f6 here. And the point is that if I capture the pawn on c4 or e5, black can potentially capture the pawn on e4. So if I go bishop c4, for example, in this position, black can trade, castles, and now the e4 pawn is very, very weak. If I castle, black can trade and even take the pawn on e4 potentially, and black is doing quite well. So in this position, I decide to take the pawn on e5, and now Shaq plays this move b5. Now, this is some new age theory. It's become very popular in the last couple of months. There have been some very big games which have featured this variation. First and foremost, in round 2 of Norway Chess, Shaq himself played this b5 move against Gucci Reza Firouzja, and that game continued with f3, castles, and then this move a3, and after bishop a5, a4, a6, bishop e2, and knight fd7. Shaq got a very, very good position. At some point, he was much better. Now, he would go on to lose the game with the black pieces to Ali Reza, but nonetheless, the opening worked out quite well. Now, in this game, of course, I had a feeling Shaq would probably repeat this line with b5, and what we have here is a situation where you have a very big white center here with these 5 pawns, but black also has his trumps with the classic connect 3 on the queen side, and more importantly, he can play c5 or put pressure on the pawn on d4 very, very quickly. So after I play f3 supporting the pawn, Shaq castles, and now I play this move a4 instead of a3. And here Shaq plays c5. Now again, there was some risk playing this variation considering how topical it's been in the last couple of months, but I felt like I would get as good of a chance in this variation as in any other opening that I might consider playing. So after c5, I go bishop to e3. If I were to take the pawn on c5, for example, black can play queen a5, creating the classic right triangle, and I'm lacking in development here. You see all these pieces, all 6 of these pieces on their original starting squares, and black very quickly can bring the rook into the game. There's pressure on the knight, the pawn is weak on c5, and already it's much easier to play for black. So I play bishop e3 here, Shaq trades, and now he finds a very important move, which is this move queen to e7. Already here, if black trades the queens on d4, he has some serious issues to deal with. First and foremost, the pawn on b5 is under attack. If black takes on a4, after bishop takes c4, suddenly you have these double pawns on a4 and a7, which are not very well placed. I have these great bishops in the middle of the board, and white is already significantly better. In the meantime, black tries to play a6, connecting the pawns here. I can now take on b5, and you cannot recapture because then you lose your rook on a8, and with it, you lose the game. So already here you have to be very careful. Now, unfortunately for me, this was played quite recently in a game between Jan-Krzysztof Duda and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. I forget which Grand Chess Tour event specifically it was played in, but this position occurred. So queen to e7 is played here by Shakh. Now, this is all still pretty standard. We know this line quite well. I take on b5. Plays rook d8. I take this pawn on c4. And now temporarily, as you'll notice, white has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. So white is up 2 pawns here, and I should be feeling pretty good about myself. But the drawback here is that once again, my king has not castled out of the center of the board. So here Shakh plays bishop to e6, attacking the queen, queen to e2, the only square that is available. Any of the squares on the d file, the queen simply gets captured by the rook. I can't go backwards on the diagonal because then the bishop will capture the queen as well, for example. So I go queen e2. Now I'm up 2 pawns, but the problem with queen e2 is now the bishop cannot be developed, and now it's going to be very hard to castle my king out of the center of the board. Here Shakh plays queen c7, attacking both the knights on c3 and e5, and now I go knight c4, queen and the bishop guard the knight. Shakh plays knight d7, and now I play this move rook a6. Now, the game that I alluded to before between Just Kidding Duda and Maxime Vachier-Lagrave had this move rook to a4, which was played, and after bishop c3, b takes c3, knight to c5, rook b4, knight to d3, queen d3, rook d3, and bishop takes d3 was played, and Duda would sack his queen and go on to win this game. Now, on first glance, if you don't know what to do, this can look quite scary because white has these 2 bishops. You have a rook and a bishop for the queen, and white is maybe a little bit better specifically if you can set up the classic wooden shield with the bishop on d4 that guards everything. That being said, I felt like Shakhriyar would look at this variation. I had a feeling he'd be familiar with it. And with such a strong game between 2 top players being in the database, there's no way that it would work. So that was my assumption, which is why I came up with this idea of playing rook to a6 here. Now here we get knight c5. I play rook to c6. Shakh goes queen e7. Only move, by the way, because if you play queen b7, for example, I can simply take the juicer on c5, and now I'm up a piece. So Shakh plays queen to e7 so that he can guard the knight on c5 with the bishop and the queen. And now here I play this move queen f2. And basically in terms of my preparation for this game, this was the critical moment. Now I was not sure we would get to this position, but I had a very strong suspicion we would because all these moves are the top computer moves. And generally when you prepare, you look to follow the top suggestions of Stockfish, Leela, etc. So after queen to f2, my big hope was that Shakhriyar would not actually know that the only move that is playable here where black is not in trouble is the sacrifice with knight takes e4. Unfortunately for me, Shakhriyar did know this move. If black plays a move like knight to a4, for example, putting pressure on the knight, I can go queen c2, guarding, and after knight to b6, for example, I can simply go king f2, followed by bishop e2 and rook d1. And with the 2 extra pawns here, white is doing excellent. Probably, I wouldn't say it's winning, but it's going to be very difficult for black to play. Much to my horror, Shakh plays knight takes e4 pretty quickly, and now I start to realize, well, unfortunately, this probably is going to end in a draw. Now, the reason I say that is because I had calculated this line before the game occurred, and I had realized that with perfect play, it's a draw, but nonetheless, I wasn't sure that Shakh would, A, know the sacrifice, but B, know all the moves by heart anyway. So after he sacks and takes back with the knight on e4, I go queen to f4. We trade the knights. He takes the pawn, and I go king to f2 here. And now basically what's happening is white has an extra knight here on c4. So if I can develop this bishop and then bring the rook into the game, it'll be GG because I can manually castle king to g1, and that's all she wrote. But unfortunately here, black has time, and here Shakh finds the best move once again, which is rook to d5. Now, it's worth noting that there was another game where I played some years back against Sergei Karyakin, where I also did a bit of a memory test. In that game, in the English Opening, Sergei sacrificed a piece, which was correct according to theory, but he was not able to remember all 25 plus moves of the variation, which led to a forced draw. And in this case, it's very similar where A, I was banking on Shakh not remembering to sack the knight, and then B, even if he did, maybe he would forget the best moves. Unfortunately, Shakh did not forget the best moves, and after rook to d5, I go queen e4. I can't develop the bishop here because then black has rook f5, collecting the queen on f4. So I go queen to e4, sidestepping the rook f5 threat. And now again, Shakh finds the best move, which is queen to f6. I go king to g1, not king e2, which would be a classic bond cloud, because after rook a d8, suddenly I can't develop the bishop or the rook. My king is in the middle of the board. You have these ops, which are very powerful on c3 and e6. And probably here I have to sack the rook. And after takes g3, maybe the game goes on, but realistically, very limited chances of winning the game. So I go king g1. Shakh plays rook a d8 here, defending his rook on d5. If he were to play a move like h6, for example, I can sack the queen. And after takes, once again, we're in endgame where I have one extra piece on the board. So here Shakh plays rook a d8, preventing the sacrifice of the queen, and now I go bishop takes a7, and here Shakh finds the best move in the position, which is rook to f5. Now again, all this I had prepared before the game, but my hope even here at the end was that maybe Shakh wouldn't remember that rook f5 is the best move, because a very obvious move to the human eye is this move rook to d4, because if white takes, after queen takes d4, if I trade the queens, there's a very nasty checkmate. My king is simply stuck on g1. There's no square for it to go to. And if I play queen e3, black can play bishop takes c4. And once again, if we trade the queens, checkmate. And here I can maybe play queen f2 and survive, but after bishop to d5, I have to sack the rook for the bishop. And after queen takes, I have to play h3, try to develop my king. And black is a little bit better here with this active bishop, queen, and rook. But of course, Shakh uses a little bit of time here. I think he used about 10 minutes, and he plays the correct move, which is rook to f5. And now the game ends in a draw after bishop to d3, rook to d5, and I go bishop f1. You may be wondering, could I play queen takes h7? After queen takes h7, king to f8 here. If I check and play king e7, suddenly I can play rook c7, but after rook 8 d7 here, my king is very weak on g1. I guess after trade king d7, trade bishop d7, my apologies. If I move the bishop to e2, for example, there's check, takes, king f1, and now after rook to f5, I'm getting mated with king e1, queen c3, king d1, rook to d5, knight d2, and queen takes d2. So I can maybe take, and computer I think says that after check, takes, and bishop d7, maybe I can play g3 here and the show goes on. But after bishop takes b5 with this king and rook not being developed, the weak bishop, weak knight, queen out to lunch on h8, just no reason to even go into this. Even if the computer thinks that after a move like queen b8, white is still maybe equal. But once again, if I do this, I make one blunder, I will also just lose the game on the spot. So instead, I play bishop f1 here. He goes rook f5, and we make the repetition, and the game ends in a draw. Now, definitely a little bit disappointing, but I felt like in this game, if Shakh did not know to sack the knight, and then he didn't know the precise sequence of moves after that, I would probably win this game for free, where he would just lose and he'd have no chance to even survive. Unfortunately, Shakh did know the line by heart, and so the game ends in a draw, which means we move to the classic Armageddon. So here we go, Armageddon, once again for me, this time with the white pieces. Now, I'd only had white pieces once in the Armageddon game thus far against Magnus Carlsen, and I did lose that game. All my other Armageddon games were with the black pieces, so in the second one, I decided to follow some advice that I heard from people after I played Magnus. After playing Magnus, people said, why'd you play the King's Gambit? Sure, you're trying to meme create content. Yes, it gets nearly 200,000 views. We all know that. But it didn't really give me great chances to win the Armageddon game. So people were saying, well, why didn't you just play like knight f3, e3, b3, quiet stuff, and just play normal chess? So what do I do in this Armageddon game? Once again, to set the stage, I have 10 minutes with the white pieces. Shakh has 7 minutes in the black pieces. No increment until move 40 when you get a 1-second increment. But I have to win the game with the white pieces. If it's a draw, then Shakhriyar gets this extra half point. We get 1 point for drawing the classical game, but half point is up for grabs. So I play knight f3, d5, and now I play b3. Shakh plays c5, and now I play e3, playing one of my patented systems where I try to develop the bishops very, very quickly on both of these diagonals. Shakh plays knight f6, I go bishop b2, and now he plays g6. Now here I decide to play this move, bishop takes f6, and I just simply play it without thinking. Now, I know that bishop takes f6 here is not the best move in the position, but I figure I want to play fast, try to put pressure on the clock, and play for simple, easy development. So after I take, Shakh takes, and now he has the bishop pair, but he also has the doubled pawns. I play c3 with the idea of playing d4 here, and now he plays bishop g7. Now, as I recall, in this system, I believe that black is actually supposed to develop bishop on this diagonal in general, because at some point, if d4 happens and we trade the pawns, black will always have scope on this diagonal, say from a3 to stop rook c1, or b4 to potentially create pins on this diagonal. So when Shakh plays bishop g7, I was a little happy to see this, because now after d4, if we ever trade, the bishop is no longer able to control these b4, a3 squares anymore, and now I have free development with knight c3. So Shakh plays queen e7, guarding the pawn on c5, and now I play this move g3. Shakh castles, I go bishop g2, fianchettoing the bishop here, and my idea is simple. Down the road, I'd love to move the knight and put pressure on the pawn on d5. Shakh plays rook d8, I castle, b6, and now I play knight to e1, sort of following my theme of trying to open up the scope for this bishop, and maybe going knight d3 and knight to f4 and pressuring the pawn on d5 down the road. One illustration, just to show you guys, is to get this setup where the pawn on d5 is very vulnerable. So after knight e1, Shakh goes knight c6, I play knight d3, and now he plays bishop f5. Here I play knight f4, Shakh goes bishop e4, and now I play an absolutely putrid move here, which is this move bishop to h3. Now, one thing that you'll notice from the time usage here is that I was moving very, very fast. I'm up 3.5 minutes on the clock. And my assumption is that if we get down to seconds on the clock, I'm just going to win the game because a 1 second increment won't be enough. So I played bishop h3 quickly, but this is a mistake. This is where I actually should have used a little bit of time and started thinking and played the very natural move knight to d2. Because after bishop takes g2, king takes g2, the show goes on here and black is completely fine. But now it's very simple for me. I can play rook c1, maybe queen f3, put pressure on the pawn. And just in general, I'd love to play this position. But in my mind, without even thinking here, I said, you know what? I don't want to trade pieces. I'm going to go bishop h3, trade my knight for the bishop, and then I'll just be better here. Because if I can get a position like this, for example, after bishop to g2, the knight and bishop are really well placed. Black no longer has a light square bishop to guard the pawn, and this pawn on d5 will be a permanent weakness. So I go bishop h3, and I think, okay, I'm going knight d2, knight takes bishop. I'm doing great. But I should have used some time here because Shakh, to his credit, used a little bit of time, and he finds this move bishop h6, which is an excellent move. And now I play this move knight e2, which is just horrible. What I should have played was knight bd2, or knight d2, I should say. But I was worried that after bishop takes f4, I could not capture with the e-pawn, because then I lose a pawn in the center of the board here, and I'm in a lot of trouble. And if I take with a g-pawn here, I was worried that after f5 followed by queen h4, how can I ever be better? Black also, of course, is a classic wooden shield as well. And I felt like I need to keep pieces on the board. So I play knight e2, and I completely miss this move bishop to f3. And now I'm very unhappy with myself because as I realized if I play this move bishop g2, after we trade, takes, knight takes pawn, I cannot capture the knight because then I lose my queen. And if I move my queen after knight c6, knight c3, yes, I'm probably okay here, but it's very unlikely I'm going to win this game after knight to b4. Let's say queen d4 and f5 here, followed by bishop g7. And just in general, pieces are coming off. It's trending towards a draw, and a draw is just not good enough. So I decide after a bit of a think to play rook e1 here. And the reason is that after the trade of pawns occurs, Shakh decides to sack the bishop with bishop takes pawn. But what I'm happy about in this position is that even though I know that this is bad for me, I'm going to be up a piece here. And if Shakh is not precise, I think I'm going to get winning chances. So even though I know the position is bad objectively, I'm up a piece here and there's a big material imbalance. So after king f1, Shakh goes rook e8, and now I play this move knight to d2 after a bit of a think. Now, what I should have played was this very unorthodox move knight to a3. Now, during the game, the only two moves I considered, or not only two moves, but there were only three moves I considered. One was knight to c3, but after knight to b4 with the idea of knight to d3, I was very, very concerned about what I was doing. And knight to d2, which I would play in the game, or queen to d2. But after queen to d2, black can trade. If I take with the queen, there's queen takes pawn, hitting the rook on a1. And after I sack the queen for the two rooks here, I simply lose the game because I cannot guard this rook in the corner. If I take with the rook here, black can go queen f3. If I block, there's checkmate in Uno. And if I go king to e1, at the very least, there's knight takes d4, and black is completely winning. So instead, I play knight d2 here, and the reason that I play knight to d2 is that I thought that I really don't have any other options. Now, knight to a3 would have been a really good move here because now I can go knight to c2, harassing the queen on e3, forcing the queen away. Let's say black was rook e7, knight c2, queen h6, and now after bishop g2, suddenly I'm simply up a horse, and after rook e8, knight g1, I'm going to be able to consolidate this position, and I'm going to have excellent chances to win with an extra knight. But I didn't see this move, and it is what it is. So I play knight to d2. Shakh trades the bishop for the knight here. And now, very regrettably, I have to take with the queen. I'd love to capture with the rook, but after queen to d3, this pin is deadly. If I move my king, he swaps the towers, takes the pawn, and I lose the rook in the corner pocket. And if I play a move like bishop g4, now there's knight takes d4, and black will be able to capture this rook on e2 with his knight due to the pin. So I regrettably have to take with the queen. Shakh plays queen to h6, and now I have to go queen g2. If I sack the queen for the two rooks again after this king g7 move, suddenly both the bishop and the knight are under attack. And when I play a move like bishop to d7 here, after knight takes d4, even though I have two rooks and a bishop for the queen, all my pieces are very misplaced here. The knight can't go to f3 because the other knight covers the square. And say I play a move like rook d1. After queen takes h2, black has a massive amount of pawns in addition to having the queen for the two rooks and the bishop, and this should simply be winning. So I go queen g2, guarding both the knight and the bishop. Shakh takes the pawn, and now I just play this move bishop g4 here. And at this point, I start to realize I'm in a lot of trouble. I'd love to play king g1 here, but after king g1, there's queen takes knight, and after queen takes queen, knight f3, it's the classic fork here, with the knight on f3 forking the queen and the rook, and when I move the king, after knight takes queen, black simply has too many extra pawns here, and again, at the very best, I'll draw, but a draw is simply not enough. So finally, I decided to play bishop g4. I'm still up a lot of time because I've been moving very quickly. Even though my position is terrible, time should play a role. So Shakh goes knight c2, forking the rooks, and now I play bishop f3. I'd love to trade the rooks and simply move my rook away, but then there's knight to e3, forking my king and my queen. So I decided to play bishop f3, Shakh plays knight e3. Now, this is the first move that I thought was a little bit imprecise, considering the situation in the game. Now, if Shakh needs to win the game, I think knight to e3 is a very, very good move in terms of keeping the winning chances alive. But at this point, I think what Shakh should have done, considering that a draw is good enough, is trade off all the pieces here, and after check king d1, played a move like rook to d8 here, or even queen to d4. And I really don't see how I'm supposed to keep the game going. Black has ideas like queen a1 or rook c8, rook to e8, wherever my king goes. And I think just in general, I would probably lose this position 95% of the time. Fortunately for me, I think Shakh sort of forgets that a draw is good enough, and he plays knight to e3. And now, at least in this position, I'm able to keep a rook on the board. After queen f2, Shakh plays rook c8, which again, starts to show that Shakh's getting nervous, not really feeling the position as much as he should, because when he goes knight to e3, the whole point of not trading off all the rooks is that now you can use both of these towers on the two open files here. So when Shakh plays rook c8, I trade the queens, I go king to f2, he plays rook c3, and now I find this excellent move a4. Now the reason this move is excellent is because when I go a4, now the pawn on b3 guards the pawn on a4, and the base of the chain with the pawn on b3 is guarded by the knight, and down the road, let's say we get some position like this, all of a sudden in this position, the bishop anchors the pawns, and suddenly I'm completely fine. So after a4, Shakh goes rook c2, I play king e3, and here Shakh uses a bunch of time before playing this move d4, and this is an excellent move from a practical standpoint. Shakh came very close to playing rook c3, and after king to d4, rook c8, knight f1, suddenly it's not so easy for black to prove an advantage here already. But Shakh uses a lot of time and plays d4. I go king d3, he checks, I take, he drops the rook back, and now the problem is that when I play knight to f1 and he goes rook d7, I have to block with the bishop, but now the king is in the center of the board, I've walked into the self pin, knight is very passive guarding h2, and I don't really have any play on the queen side, so black should simply be able to convert. But again, this is Armageddon, you have to try to keep the game going. So we get f5, I play rook d1, king g7, h4 here, rook e2, I go knight to e3, guarding the bishop on d5 here, and trying to stop rook g2. Shakh plays rook b2. I go rook d3, guarding both the pawns from the third rank. He plays h5, king c4, rook f2, and now I go rook d4. Now, right around this point is where I feel like Shakh started to lose the thread of what was going on and using too much time tunneling on one plan. What Shakh was trying to desperately do at this point is keep the pin on the bishop here so I can no longer move the bishop, but then go f4 and simplify the position. If I move the king, he takes, and with the three connected pawns, you just start pushing p and win the game very routinely. And if I go rook d4, again, you can trade and play f6 followed by g5. And this is just going to be very, very easy for black to at least draw, if not win. So I go rook d4, stopping f4. He plays rook e2, rook d3, rook f2, rook d4, rook e2, and now I go knight to d1 here. And at this point, what I think Shakh started tunneling on was he has to play f4. He forgot that he can also play other moves like f6 and g5, bring the king in. He just got too fixated on this one idea. And considering the low time, it's understandable. So I go rook c2, king d3, rook h2, king e3, get rook e7. Now I go king f4, and here he plays rook to d7. Now it's worth noting king f3 would have been a better move here for the simple fact that if black plays rook d7, I can maybe go knight to f2, and the rook on h2 is suddenly glued in the corner. Whereas when I go king to f4, rook d7, I cannot go knight f2, so now the rook remains very active. And if in this position you were to say move the rook to c2, now after bishop c4, the bishop anchors the pawns. I have an open file, and my rook is very active here, and I think I have great chances to win the game. Instead, I go king f4, rook d7, b4 here, because at this point, I just have to go. I have to try to create something, and Shakh is now under 1 minute. Now, mind you, he's getting a 1 second increment, but still, it's not a lot of time. So we get rook e2, I play king f3, rook e1, king f2, and now he goes rook e4. Now, this is objectively a very good move, but in retrospect, I think it's actually a practical mistake because now the position gets very tricky. After rook e4, I trade the rooks and I go knight to c3. I can't take the pawn because then I would lose my horse. So after knight c3, he has to go f5 to guard the pawn on e4 here. King e3, king f6, king d4. And now Shakh plays g5 and I go a5. Now, why do I say it's a mistake? You're obviously looking at the bar, you're thinking, well, it's completely fine. First of all, Shakh is getting very low on time. But secondly here, now you can't really get the king to the center. You can't easily create a passed pawn here. And you have to be very careful how you play it. So Shakh trades the pawns on h4, and I think this is probably the last real moment where, if we forget about the time situation, where he could have probably thought for a little bit and come up with a practical solution. I think that solution that he should have come up with was trading on a5 here and then playing this move f4, because after knight takes e4, king f5, yes, I'm able to take on g5 and all the pawns come off, but in this position here with the outside h pawn here, I can draw the game, but I have zero chance to win. And also Shakh's moves become very obvious. He's just going to push the pawn up the board. He does not have to use more than a few seconds on any given move, and I think he would have drawn the game quite routinely here. Instead, he trades, and now he trades on a5 and goes a6, and now I play knight e2. Now, a6 is a fairly severe blunder as well. The reason Shakh played it is he was worried that I would get the pawn to a6, and then at some point I'd be able to get this bishop to b7, get the knight to b5, win the pawn on a7, and win the game. But of course, in this position, as we look at it here, if you just wait with rook d8, how exactly am I getting the knight to b5? If I go knight b5 here, there's e3. If I go a6, there's rook d6. I can't guard the pawn due to the pin, and it's just very simple to play. Now, Shakh plays a6, so he's worried about a6, but a6 is a mistake because now the pawn is on the same square as my bishop, and I'm going to have chances to capture it later on. So I go knight to e2, Shakh plays rook g7, bishop c4, rook d7, I go back, and now I play this move bishop c6, which is apparently a blunder, but at this point, I can't take the draw of bishop c4. If I go bishop c4, rook d7, and king c5, for example, after king e5 takes an f4, black has these connected passed pawns that are just marching up the board, and I am going to lose the game very, very soon. So I go bishop c6, and now he plays rook g4. I go bishop b7. I think here again, it would have been better to just go rook c7 and try to make the draw. But he goes rook g4 with 9 seconds. Bishop b7, takes, and now he plays e3. Another excellent move here. Computer says question mark because king e3 leads to a draw. But as we know in Armageddon, a draw is good enough. So here I can't take the pawn because of rook a4, so I go king c5. And now Shakh makes a huge blunder with f4, missing my next move. Now, in this position, if Shakh goes rook a4, let's just say king b6 and f4. After bishop to b7 here, there's rook to b4, king c7, you sack and play f3, and the pawns are simply too fast going down the board. And in this position, if I play this move knight to g1, for example, after rook to a2, with all these pawns marching up the board, it's very hard to believe that I can stop all of them, and I'm not even convinced here that I would find knight g1 to begin with. Luckily for me, Shakh plays f4 and he misses bishop b7, and now it's very, very difficult to play because suddenly the bishop is going to f3 where it will guard the knight. I'm blockading these pawns going up the board, and at this point you have to play f3 takes and rook a4 to make the draw, but Shakh decides to play rook h2, which is a logical move with limited time on the clock. Here I go bishop f3, he plays rook f2, and now I find this move a6, and suddenly just like that, it's all over. I'm completely winning. So after a6, Shakh takes, I play a7. Now you can't stop the pawn, and here Shakh plays rook to f2. Now with 2 seconds on the clock here, I start to use my time because I have 1 minute. I'm just thinking about what to do. Now my first instinct is to make a queen and then go something like check, king g5, and queen g7. But after king to h4, I did not actually see a forced win here. So when I didn't see a forced win, I then started thinking, are there other ways to play it? And what I simply overlooked in my calculations is that after I queen and black takes, or move queen to a6, checking the king on f6 and collecting the rook on e2, and that's game over. I just win the game on the spot. But even with 1 minute, I simply panic, and I see knight c3 here thinking, well, after e2, I can just take and make a queen anyway, and with a rook and 2 versus a queen, this is a very simple win. Much to my horror, I play knight c3, and luckily, Shakh does not realize what the move is immediately, and he ends up flagging here. What Shakh tried to play was this move rook to a2, which is a brilliant move, because after rook to a2, I cannot queen without being captured, and I lose the game. And if I take the rook here, suddenly black goes to e2, and even though we both get queens here, this is a draw. Queen and knight versus queen is a theoretical draw. But when I play knight to c3 here, I think Shakh had already sort of zoned out, because Shakh probably saw queen, rook e2, and queen to a6 winning the game. And so when I played knight c3, I think this came as a surprise. He wasn't able to reset. He used about 1 second before he went to reach for the rook and tried to play rook a2, but it was too late. His flag had fallen, and he ends up losing this game in a heartbreaking fashion. So I end up getting the win in this Armageddon game. I get the full 1.5 points that was possible after drawing the classical game. So all's well that ends well. I feel like in general, when I play chess, I tend to look at it from a very logical standpoint, and I feel like this win in Armageddon makes up for the game that I lost to Wesley so early in the tournament. I never should have lost that game to Wesley, but I also never should have won this game. So it feels like all is right in the world and the score is right where it should be. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from round number 7 of Norway Chess. Now, to give you one last little update, Fabiano would draw his classical game, but he did lose the Armageddon game to Gukesh. So currently, I'm 2 points behind Fabiano in the race for first place, headed into the final 2 rounds. Tomorrow will be a rest day, so I'll probably study up, get ready for my black game, the final black game of the tournament against Norbek Abdusattorov from Uzbekistan, who has now lost 2 games in a row. He lost, I forget who he lost to yesterday. I think he lost to Fabiano, and today he loses to Wesley. So he's reeling a little bit, so I'm going to try to study, take my chances, but tomorrow will be a rest day, so I'll come back for round number 8. I'll make sure to give you guys a recap after I play Norbek, but I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap. Make sure to hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already, and I'll be back with a recap after I play my 8th round here at Norway Chess against Norbek Abdusattorov. See you guys soon. Bye.